today what we're going to do is take an ancient piece of crap and upgrade it. Phil here, and we're going to go through an old Rails app, and what I want to just talk about how I upgraded that from its existing state of in production. It was on Rails 5.2, and to move it up at least to Rails 6.1, and with a view to getting it to Rails 7 soon enough, and also to fix that code base and what we learned along the way. So the website that I'm talking about has been in existence since 1997. Yes, the internet existed back in 1997, and this site has been running continuously since then. And originally it was on PHP, I think, and then I switched it over to Rails in 2006, maybe 2005, something like that. It was a pretty early Rails app for me. And unfortunately, I learned as I went along, so it's pretty horrible. And one of the things about this channel, I always say, I'm not perfect. I'm not the world's greatest developer. I learn as I go along, and I improve hopefully as I go along, and that's what this is all about today. So we started way back 2004 Rails, whatever it was, and got it up to Rails 3, and it sat on Rails 3 for a long time, like I think a lot of applications did, and then moved up to Rails 5, and then it kind of got stuck there. Features were added. It was just a mess. And the site's been successful. This site's made, well, certainly over $1 million, probably a couple of $1 million in its time. But I'm a developer, so we want to be a little bit proud of what we've got. So let's take a look at what we're going to do. And I'm not embarrassed to say it. Here's the website. The website's Lottery Canada, and yeah, been running since 1997. So the first thing we're going to do is, I upgraded this at least to Postgres a little while ago. It was running on MySQL. Not that I think that Postgres is that much better. It runs smaller and faster. And for this case, I wanted to reduce the resources. And because like most ad-based sites, this isn't making as much money as it used to. So I've upgraded it, and as you can see, it's on Rails 5.2 and on Postgres. So the first thing I'm going to do, now I've done this already. I'm not going to do a complete run through of this because I had to go through and figure out this, and now I made some notes, and then I'm going back and kind of giving you the highlights. So I'm not doing the whole thing here. So the first thing that I did, we're on master, is of course I go over and I create a new branch. And let's talk, well, before we get that far, let's talk about the strategy here. Because it's a data intensive app, it's showing lots of various data, historical data going back, decades. We want to make sure that the new site still works with that data and still pulls in and properly parses and puts the data into the database. So the only way to really know that is to know that it's working now. And we don't care that it's working perfectly now. We're not here to fix bugs at this point. What we're here to do is figure out what is the thing doing at this point. So the first step, what I did, the other thing I forgot to tell you is this app has no tests. There's no tests being written. I didn't write any tests of this over the time. So what's the first thing we want to do is write some tests, and not tests to check that the code works. We're going to accept that the code works. What we want to see is that we want to check what goes in and what comes out right now. We're not here to fix, we're here to figure out. So what I did, and I'll put some links in because it was a cool site that a thing talk about generating Rails test fixtures from current data from database dump. So what I did is I took some data from the real production database, dumped it out, put it into fixtures, and used those fixtures to load in and say, okay, this is what happens when we have this fixture data. let's make sure that when we upgrade, the same thing happens, because we don't want to break the functionality, we just want to improve the code base. So that was the first thing. So I went over and we'll go over to my branch here, which is Postgres and tests. And so I added some fixtures that were kind of dumps from data. So all this is like an actual data dump. All of this is an actual data dump. And you can see even in the database, for some reason, I've got two different data structures. One using kind of text, and one of them is parsed out into a hash already. So I needed to make sure that it supported both of those. And I pulled in some real data, and then what I did is I wrote some functional tests, and specifically, to make sure that it should say the lottery data when it pulls it in, and it should build one, and the reason why it should fail, so we want to make sure it fails in the same way. So it fails if it doesn't have a draw date, it fails if it's not associated with a lottery, these kinds of things. When we create it, we want to make sure we get these numbers. When we pull it in, we want to make sure that display numbers, which is a parsed field, comes out the same. So that's a lot of it. It's a lot of assert that this data is what we're getting out of the model. Because we know if we're getting the data out of the model right, we can make the views work right. So I went through and I wrote tons of these for different types of models in the app. So definitely for lottery draw, which of course is the core. For the lottery, no, I didn't do it for the lottery info because I didn't need to do that. So yeah, certainly for the lottery draw, and for these others, I went through and wrote tests. That was the important step number one. So that when we go over and first of all, let's get Docker compose up. Let's get the database running. And then we should be able to say bundle exec rails test, and with any luck that will work. Bundle exec test, we want test model. Make sure that I'm not a huge fan of tests because I think often they're written to pass, but in this case we need tests, there we go, to go through and check that the data is in the same state it was before the upgrade. Very handy feature of tests. So once I had that working, I went over and I converted it to Rails 6. Now, as you might know, that's a huge undertaking. And there's some great articles about what to do with that. But the first thing is, what I did is I I moved my gem file lock and ran a bundle. So that will try and, for fun, let's do that. Let's go to Postgres and tests, and let's check out -b pg and t upgrade. And so we're going to switch this just to Rails 6.1. Let's do one of those, squiggly. 6.1, and the other nice thing to do, of course, is to create a Rails 6 app and see what it does in the gem file. So we can see, okay, it's doing this. What the hell? Let's do that. And okay, SAS Rails 6, SAS Rails 6, and things like Webpacker, which are not going to be in, so we're going to add Webpacker. TurboLinks is the same. JBuilder, interesting. We'll put a version in. What the hell? This stock thing, I don't like it. So you want to kind of manually fiddle around with your gem file and coffee rails, of course, we're going to leave it in, but some of these won't pass. And then the other thing, I like to use this annotate gem, which I don't think is in there already. Yeah, it is. Okay. And Webpacker, we put that in. Yeah. And yeah, that web mock is already in for the testing. So great. So we've done all that. Save it. And then what I do is take my gem file lock, and we call this Rails 5. And we can just do a bundle. And it'll go out and kind of pull down the latest of everything. And if there's a problem, it might show you the problem. There we go. So it pulled down anything that needed to be upgraded. Great. There we go. I use a Ruby version file. It's 2.75, which is fair enough. So, and then let's do a bundle exec Rails app update, which will go through and try and update a bunch of stuff for you and give you a handy dandy output. It tells you what the difference is with boot. And what I do for most of these things, I will just overwrite. If I know I didn't fiddle with it, like, of course, roots I fiddled with, so I'm not going to overwrite that. We can look at the diff, because there is one important difference, and that'll be right at the top. Oh, nope, there's no difference there because I did already. So no, we're going to leave it. And application, it's going to remove almost everything and add these settings. We're going to leave it. Environment. Let's take a look. Yeah, absolutely. If they, let's do that. Development. What's the difference here? Yeah, it's going to remove all the stuff that we set in. So my feeling is to leave it. And production, we're going to leave. Test, we can overwrite. Assets, probably we didn't do anything in here, so I think it's best to let it overwrite. Backtrack silencers, you know, no. We can overwrite that. Cookie serializer, overwrite that. Filter parameter logging, overwrite that. Inflections. Yeah, we'll leave that. MIME types. We'll leave that. Wrap parameters. We'll overwrite that. Not locales. Things like config.u, yes, overwrite. So that was quick, and then it goes through and it puts in these cable and storage things, probably there from an earlier version. And then it says there is no manifest file because we didn't have that before. So let's go in, and where is it? App assets, config, app assets, and then let's create a new file, and it's going to be app assets config manifest.js, app assets config manifest.js, and let's just put that stuff in there. And we might need to add our own things later, but that'll get us going. And I just check that I have the env file, which I do. So we might even be able to go bundle exec Rails S. It's not so complicated, really, to upgrade from 5 to 6. You'll get some of this stupid stuff. And Webpacker. Oh yeah, so you do exec Webpacker install. Because we didn't have that before. Write out some files for us. There we go, does the yarn stuff. Bunch of warnings for different stuff that we're not so interested in. And it should do everything fine. There we go. Now let's try it. There we go. So we're listening on 3 localhost 3000. Now personally, okay, I don't like to use localhost 3000. I like to use more fancy names like that. So I use ngrok. And so one of the things you're going to need to do in your development environment is make sure that the if I start ngrok, okay, and it'll say, yeah, this, you can't put it in. You know, you need to add a config hosts. Now you can do it like that. I guess I don't. So we're going to do that. Sometimes I put a variable in the end file. And so then here we go, it's running. Let's restart it. And there we're getting the same error that we got when we hit localhost. And that's because search, that's now changed. So when you upgrade certain things, of course, you're going to see that your gem files have changed and so on and so forth. So you're going to need to make those changes. And we're going to switch over to a version I have prepared earlier. Okay, so this is the, there I did it, the end host v. So I do that in the end file. I add some stuff in there so you can change it more easily. And all that's in, great. So as you can tell from the name of this branch, Sorbet, for me, the next thing to do was to add Sorbet in. Now, I've recently become a bit bullish on Sorbet, and I'll tell you why. Because it really does, you know, Sorbet, for those of you who don't know, there's another video you can go and see. It does type checking. And for an app like this that has so much legacy code that you really probably don't understand what's going on or why it's going on, going through and adding the type checking was huge help. So as usual, I went through and I did all the models first. So, and I type them strict, I do them one at a time, and we go through and then we can figure out what actually is going on in here, you know, what's being passed in, you know, what do we need, and then have it throw the errors. And then when we run our tests, we'll get errors with Sorbet, or when we run it locally, we'll get errors with Sorbet. I really am big on it. I probably don't use it right, but I mean, like even doing stuff like this where you say, okay, we're going to return a hash which has a string as the key. If you do that wrong, at least you'll figure out that's where the problem is and what you expect, and your arrays are strings and so on like this. I think it's really great. You know, type checking is something that was great in Ruby and Rails for a while, but I think when the more sophisticated we get and the more developers you have and the older the projects get, type checking it really shows to be handy. So I went through, I added the type checking, and then we can see that we end up with something that is visually, of course, the same. And oh, there we go. It's getting there. This is the live site, and now this is the upgraded site, and you can see pretty much everything. Of course, the ads are different, dates are different. But this one is running on Rails 6. And so that process, this whole process took me about, not the 25 minutes that I've been rambling, but it took me about 2 weeks on and off, mostly off, to upgrade the code base, write those tests, get Sorbet installed, get Rails 6 running, and then push it out to live. And now I feel much more confident in the code base, and so moving from Rails 6 to Rails 7 and making certain things action cable and live updating, that's going to be a whole lot easier. Anyway, I hope this has been somewhat interesting for you. If you have, I know that I haven't covered all the details, so if you have any questions, want specific things, I'd be happy to go in, show you more details about specific things if there's anything specific you want to learn about. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, watch another video. See you later.